For it is He who gave me unerring knowledge of what exists, to know the structure of the world and the activity of the elements, the beginning and end and middle of times, the alternations of the solstices and the changes of the seasons, the cycles of the year and the constellations of the stars, the natures of animals and the tempers of wild beasts, the powers of spirits and the reasonings of men, the varieties of plants and the virtues of roots. I learned both what is secret and what is manifest, for wisdom, the fashioner of all things, taught me. Wisdom chapter 7. The world is full of patterns. Everything is connected. Look at a tree. The trunk divides. Then those first branches divide out of it. Then the next branches diverge out of those. Then even more branches multiply out of those. Then even more new branches multiply out of those, and on and on and on. And the endless variation springs from a single seed. This is a fractal pattern, a self-repeating and self-similar structure. This fractal pattern is also seen in your blood vessels and nervous system, in networks of rivers, in the lightning of the heavens, and in the web of neurons in your brain, which is the same structure as the universe on a larger scale. It is also found abstractly in the nature of logic and of geometry, in which proofs are derived from self-evident first principles, which then set the stage for new proofs, and so on. Observe the tip of your finger. That spiral structure is found on the stump of a tree, in the shells of the sea, in hurricanes, and in spiral galaxies. The in and out of your breath, the movement of blood in your vessels, the back and forth of the waves, the waxing and waning of the moon, and the rising and setting of the sun, and the revolutions of the stars are all the same cyclical pattern at different scales. Though visually different from the branching pattern, which best typifies the principle of fractality, spirals or circles within circles within circles are also fractal, because they sequentially repeat the original in gradually shrinking or expanding iterations. Here are some other examples. The orbits of the planets in the solar system are mirrored in the orbits of electrons around the nucleus in an atom. The double helix of DNA harkens to the twin serpents of the Hermetic caduceus. Two subatomic particles form a visual image of the yin-yang. As above, so below, and as below, so above. As the macrocosm, so the microcosm, and as the microcosm, so the macrocosm. On earth as it is in heaven. As the universe, so humanity. Everything is connected to everything else. Besides visual patterns in nature, there are abstract patterns as well, such as the category organelle, cell, organism, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere, planet, solar system, and galaxy. Some categories exist in parallel systems. For example, organisms are also members of a species, which is part of a genus, which is part of a family, which is part of an order, which is part of a class, which is part of a phylum, which is part of a kingdom, which are groups of living organisms. certain groups of levels within hierarchies are sometimes different from other groups of levels. For instance, the relationships between organelle, cell, organism, etc. are different from planet, solar system, etc., even though the lower group of levels can still be grouped under the larger group of levels. So, there are visual and abstract patterns or categories in nature. In the same way, there are visual and abstract patterns in human society. Countries contain states or provinces, in which there are cities or towns, in which there are families, and in which there are individual people. There are patterns found abstractly in the unconscious human mind, in behavior and personality, certain innate ways of seeing the world and making decisions, and associated archetypal energies around which thoughts, memories, and emotions are theorized to constellate. There are also abstract patterns or archetypes in the mythology of human civilizations. In every culture under the sun, independently of one another, an intuitive understanding of a cosmic hierarchy has emerged. Think about that for a second. There is the universal pattern of God or spirit, of heavenly bodies with earthly counterparts, of the afterlife, of chaos monster, of descent and ascent, of what is now called superstitions, which are related to omens, certain everyday actions that create good or bad relationships, apart from mechanical causality in a subtle way. For example, shaking hands over a threshold or placing two mirrors opposite one another. Ancient myths echo in legends, fairy tales, and stories of all kinds throughout history, and we will explore some of these examples. Though mythology is now seen as more or less irrelevant, its archetypes have resurfaced in hidden and surprising ways in modern phenomena and cultural narratives, making a true understanding of them relevant now more than ever. Here are some examples. The archetype of demigod is seen in Hercules and Achilles, Gilgamesh, Maui in Hawaiian myth, the Egyptian pharaoh as an incarnation of the sun god Ra, and the god kings of Rome and many other civilizations, and of the Nephilim in the book of Genesis, whose mysterious origin is further expounded in the apocryphal but important Book of Enoch. This relates to another archetypal myth, the gift of techne to humans. In the Book of Enoch, fallen angels, who later become the gods of the nations, also known as the Watchers, procreate with human women to produce the Nephilim, the mighty men of old, the men of renown. In the legacy of Cain, the first city builder, they teach man esoteric knowledge and help create a technological society. Though this is wiped out in the flood, it continues with the later giant clans and many others. This narrative is alluded to in the New Testament epistles, so compares to the Babylonian Apkallu, semi-divine sages portrayed as half fish or half bird, who teach humanity secrets and help create an advanced civilization, which is likewise destroyed by a flood, echoing also the Greek story of Atlantis and Varaka in Hinduism, among others. The Babylonian king Hammurabi establishes his authority as legitimate by claiming a connection to this antediluvian wisdom. Similarly, the Titan Prometheus steals fire from the gods to give to humans. The story of the Nephilim also relates to the pattern of giants in general, usually involving an ancient war or gigantomachy against them. For instance, in Norse lore, the giant Ymir is killed by Odin and his brothers, and his blood becomes a flood that wipes out the Jotnar frost giant race, though one survives on a boat. The equivalent in Greece is the races of the Titans and the monstrous Gigantes, the latter of whom are created when the blood of Uranus, the heavens, falls to the ground in his overthrow by his son, the Titan Cronus. Later, Zeus, the son of Cronus, overthrows him and imprisons the Titans in Tartarus with the giants. The chaotic creation of the Gigantes parallels the unstable joining of heaven and earth, or divine and human, in the Book of Enoch, which causes the flood. Zeus imprisoning the Titans in Tartarus echoes Yahweh casting the Watchers into the underworld, as described in the Epistle of Jude, quote, "And the angels that did not keep their own position, but left their proper dwelling, have been kept by him in chains in the deepest darkness until the judgment of the great day." The Apostle Peter, describing this event, even uses the specific Greek word Tartarus, which is the deepest layer of the underworld in Greek mythology. The spirits of the dead Nephilim are likewise cast into the abyss until the day of judgment, according to the Book of Jubilees, though a portion of them still roam the earth. Relatedly, it is more well known that nearly every culture in history has a flood myth. Besides the all too familiar story of Noah's Ark, which, as described, destroys the giants, and besides the fall of the frost giant Ymir, there is the Sumerian flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Manu in the fish in India, the Egyptian going forth by day, the Chinese Kun in the flood, the Greek Deucalion's flood, and the Aztec flood of Coxcox. This pattern also appears in Incan, Hawaiian, Native American, Hopi, and Aboriginal cultures. Relatedly, there is the succession myth, in which a new god usurps an old one. There is the previously mentioned overthrow of Ymir, and the usurpation of Uranus by Cronus and the other Titans by Zeus. Likewise, the primordial hermaphroditic being Prajapati, sprung from the cosmic egg, is killed by the subsequent gods in Hinduism. The Babylonian deity Marduk slays his mother Tiamat, the saltwater dragon. Though not categorized as succession myths, there are stories of thunder gods overpowering serpentine monsters, such as the Canaanite god Baal defeating Yam the sea and Lotan the seven-headed sea serpent, Zeus defeating the monster Tychon, and the Hindu thunder god Indra slaying Vrtra the dragon of drought, the serpent Ahi, and various demons. Thor battles the Midgard serpent Jormungandr. This is reflected in other stories and images as well. This brings us to another pattern, ancient serpent or dragon as such. Besides the ones already mentioned, this includes the winged serpents of ancient Egypt, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl in Aztec culture, the Mayan feathered serpent, winged dragons in Western culture, and the seraphim in Jewish angelology. There are also dragons without wings in Asia, the aboriginal rainbow serpent, the hydra in Greek mythology, and the deceptive Nakash in the Garden of Eden in the Book of Genesis. This relates to the ubiquitous symbol of the snake, or two intertwined snakes around a pole, such as the previously shown Greek caduceus of Hermes. There is one of the most significant mythical patterns, the axis mundi or cosmic center, a sacred tree, mountain, or stone. Some examples are the Norse Yggdrasil or world tree, the Mayan Yaxchi tree, the Islamic Kaaba stone in Mecca, the Greek Omphalos stone at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, Mount Meru in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, the Chinese Mount Kenlun, the Canaanite Mount Zaphon, and in the Hebrew scriptures, the Mountain of God, which in the beginning is the Mountain of Paradise, described as such in Ezekiel 28, on which is the Garden of Eden, and in the midst of which is the Tree of Life. Several other places become the Mountain of God, especially Mount Sinai, and then Mount Zion, on which is Jerusalem and in which is the Temple. In Apostolic Christianity, the cross on Mount Calvary is the ultimate cosmic center, and every altar partakes in this cosmic pattern because of the transcendent nature of the sacrifice it represents. Across civilizations, there are ceremonies, disciplines, physical artifices, and visual symbols, such as, respectively, sacrifices, weddings, funerals, seasonal celebrations for holidays, sacred fires, the making of idols to host certain gods, certain rituals to create what were understood to be god kings, astrology, alchemy, pyramids, altars, graves in the earth, the Ouroboros, the Star of David, the swastika, and mandala like images, cosmic circles within circles. Finally, as a different category than mythical patterns, though related, specific notions of morality, such as about human dignity, at least to some extent, as well as about family and sexuality, have similarly appeared across cultures. It is only in recent times that the modern revolutions have strangely challenged such basic notions, though specific ideas are kept, such as the uniquely Judeo-Christian idea of universal, radical human dignity. People do not seem very interested in the origin of this idea, or in the origin of morality at all, and what it implies. To bring this to another level, in certain worldviews, the chain of being culminates and originates in God, the uncreated pattern of all being, who, properly speaking, transcends even the categories of existence and non existence. In traditional Judeo Christian cosmology, there is a hierarchy under God within heaven as well, not just what is observable to us on earth. Angels, archangels, principalities, powers, virtues, dominions, thrones, cherubim, seraphim, and the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother of God and Queen of Angels. There are also ranks of apostles, prophets, martyrs, confessors, etc. The 9 angelic choirs are assigned different duties, some closer to God and some closer to earth. Similarly, there are patron saints and angels of certain people, places, and things. Importantly, both heavenly and earthly hierarchies are part of the universe or reality. And just because there are different levels in hierarchies doesn't mean one level is more or less valuable than another. To summarize this entire section, the main point is that religious temples, symbols, rituals, stories, and way of understanding and interacting with reality have appeared independently from one another on every culture on Earth throughout time and space. It is worth noting, also, that not only do certain myths and images appear ubiquitously, it is also that they appear in our times as well, though in different forms. Specific modern thinkers, reflecting on society's massive changes since the so-called Enlightenment, argue that humans are fundamentally and unavoidably religious and ritualistic beings. In this definition, ritual is simply action directed toward purpose, and some purposes or ends are much higher than others, which is why religious rituals, at least traditionally, look the way they do. Candles, bowing, templated responses, etc. For example, analogous to ancient totem poles or sacred pillars are flagpoles. The flag is simply a sacred symbol which is venerated as the iconography of the state. There are also civic holidays, anthems, and processions. As another example, people might be confused or laugh at the odd hat, dress-like cassock, and robe-like vestments of a priest or bishop. But we wear uniforms all the time, even though we don't need to. Sports clothing, military and police caps, badges, etc. It's not about being holier than thou, it's just an intuitively necessary action. Is the Nicene Creed really all that different than the Pledge of Allegiance? The difference in religion is that all these elements carry higher significance. As another example of these patterns in modern times, Certain film and book franchises have generated massive cult-like subcultures known as fandoms. These include Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Marvel, and video games such as Halo and Elden Ring. These even take the form of cosplay events, where fans dress up as certain characters and even act out certain scenes, such as the organization Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. Political ideologies or activism in general, though more lacking in mythic imagery, provide us with a frame for understanding the world, and are also more embodied in rituals like protesting or even rioting. If you reason simply, you'll realize that they are secular mythologies, replacements for pre-modern stories that were passed down from generation to generation, and served as a founding story for civilizations. On, what matters is that these narratives unconsciously fulfill, to a superficial extent, the human need for a narrative. So the point is not only that certain myths and symbols are universal, it is also that the patterns of story, symbol, and ceremony are inevitable, no matter what form they may take. Let's summarize the concepts here presented. The world is connected together at multiple levels through fractal patterns that instantiate themselves at various levels, abstractly, visually, in different levels of nature, and different levels of human society. Ultimately, though, the patterned nature of the world can never be fully understood because it is the very frame of our perception. Now that some concepts have been outlined, let's take somewhat of a turn. Throughout the world, there are certain mysteries. The nature of human consciousness and its connection to the cosmos. Dreams, whether they have meaning, and if so, how. Strange or difficult to explain dream phenomena, as well as paranormal or mystical experiences. Miracles, such as the ancient annual miracle of the Holy Fire in Jerusalem, the incorrupt bodies of saints, the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the Shroud of Turin, both of which are scientifically unexplained, as are certain Eucharistic miracles, among hundreds of reported Eucharistic miracles in history. The question of intelligent extraterrestrials and the UFO phenomenon. Why are we here? What is the origin and purpose of the universe and humanity? Where do all these patterns in religion, myth, and nature come from? If you really think about it, the examples of patterns in mythology challenge prevalent modern notions that religions are made up and that myths are primitive, speculative explanations, rather than actually revealing the pattern of reality. In fact, I would even argue that this extremely narrow definition of myth has emerged because modern people actually don't understand how or why myths emerge, and that they project this misunderstanding onto the ancients. From the ancient spiritual worldview, it's the equivalent of saying that the physical marks used to write a word, or the vocal sounds that it's made of, are somehow mutually exclusive or more important than the actual meaning of the word. Think about that. In other words, scientific and mythic interpretations, though very different, are not mutually exclusive because they ask entirely different questions. However, the nature of pre-modern cosmology, and the metaphysic necessary to recover it, and the modern misunderstanding of it is perhaps too deep of a topic in general for this video. One explanatory theory is that the myths don't represent transpersonal realities, but are external representations of internal psychological archetypes that have become universally encoded within the mind over millions of years of human evolution. This is psychologist Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious, a reservoir in which these archetypes exist and animate human behavior. The archetypes can be projected externally onto certain elements of nature or persons. Another theory is that intelligent aliens visited humanity long ago and continue to do so. Of course, there's the theory that the pyramids across the world were built with the help of these beings, who were worshipped as gods. There's also the mind-bendingly abstract and curious interdimensional beings hypothesis in theoretical physics, proposed by the brilliant scientist in the field of ufology Jacques Vallée, which is far too much of a rabbit hole for now. As for the patterns in nature, people will say that, of course, patterns can be explained in terms of mechanisms like gravity, and that fractal patterns emerge simply because they are efficient for nature. But it doesn't matter that or how they can be explained. Their fundamental meaning remains. There is an explanation, or perspective, which is slightly different, of these patterns, particularly regarding myths, and it is simple and natural. It is a spiritual perspective that these realities, such as cosmic and territorial spirits, demigods, monsters, and sacred energies that touch certain places and objects, actually exist independently of our minds and can be identified in the world. Because the go-to secular response to this is that it's crazy, it is worth noting that some of these categories exist in different ways than others. Relatedly, no matter what complex structures exist in the human psyche or in nature, meaning is inevitable. Facts cannot exist by themselves. Powerful narratives emerge that are so transcendent that they shouldn't exist following the materialist logic, particularly the Christian story, which has become so familiar to us that its supremely strange, lofty, and paradoxical nature is practically invisible. In its truly ancient, sacramental, and mystical form is relatively unnoticed. And if reality could truly be reduced to complex mechanisms, we should not be able to even perceive this very fact, because we would be purely reducible to these mechanisms. Our minds cannot be fully abstracted from the world. At the same time, in my opinion, this does not mean that the theories mentioned don't have truth to them. What it means is this: that these transpersonal realities exist, and that reality is fractally animated by higher meaning at all levels, in a dance between heaven and earth, time and space. This is the relationship of multiplicity to unity, which is the nature of being itself. Thank you for watching. If you find this somewhat rambling video interesting, or are intrigued by any of these mysteries of the cosmos, please like, comment, and subscribe. I know I sound like a YouTuber. Especially, please subscribe to my blog linked below. I plan to explore topics like these in much more detail, and hopefully on this channel as well.